Have you ever wondered, who am I, if even my own thoughts are not entirely my own? Am I truly living, or merely reacting? Deep within the brain, where every decision, emotion, and memory is shaped, there may lie a hidden truth, that what we call will, self, or consciousness might just be illusions, crafted by the very system we believe we control. Today's video is a journey through the maze of consciousness, where you'll meet yourself, not through a mirror, but in the light of awakening. In part 1 and part 2, we'll uncover the illusion of free will, from seemingly minor behaviors to the life-defining choices we thought we made freely. But don't leave too soon, because part 3 and part 4 will take you into the deepest layers, where emotions manipulate every choice, where ancestral memories still echo in your brain, and ultimately, where you'll realize that the ego is nothing more than a story that was never truly real. If any of this stirs something gently in your heart, stay with us until the end. And if this journey feels meaningful to you, please consider subscribing, as a quiet way to walk together, so that whenever you need to return, this place will always have a light waiting for you. Part 1: The brain, a ceaselessly operating machine. Decisions not made by us. Let's begin with a familiar example. Just one more episode, and then you stay up all night. You intended to watch only one episode, but ended up awake until morning. Was that truly an act of will, or just a product of an unconscious stream flowing through your brain? According to Dr. Heather Berlin, a clinical neuroscientist, the brain functions like a perfectly lubricated machine. Many decisions are made even before we become aware that a choice is being made. She cites studies showing that neural activity in the motor cortex occurs 300 to 500 milliseconds before a person consciously feels they've made a decision to act. This aligns with experiments by Benjamin Libet, one of the first researchers to explore the time gap between brain activity and the feeling of intention. In another context, Yuri Maus, a researcher at Chapman University, designed experiments using transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, to test the sense of control over behavior. When scientists stimulated the right motor cortex, participants' fingers moved involuntarily, but when asked, they weren't sure whether they initiated the movement or it was caused by the machine. This ambiguity suggests that the feeling of "I decided" is simply a post-event rationalization created by the brain, rather than a true expression of free will. Buddhist philosophy anticipated this thousands of years ago. The Buddha taught, there is no permanent self, all phenomena arise due to conditions. Will is not the starting point, but a mental event arising from a chain of causes, much like volitional formations, sakra, in the 12 links of dependent origination. When we understand this, we stop blaming ourselves for negative habits. Instead, we learn to recognize the conditions giving rise to behavior, and from there, create new environments that help transform consciousness. Sleepwalking and the fragmentation of the self. Dr. Emmanuel During, a sleep specialist at the Icahn School of Medicine, describes sleepwalking as an imbalance in the brain's coordination between wakefulness and deep sleep. Normally, during deep sleep, all regions of the brain slow down to allow the body full rest. But in sleepwalkers, certain areas, such as the motor cortex, which controls movement, the cerebellum, which coordinates motion and balance, and the visual processing regions, which guide spatial orientation, may become activated and partially awaken. Meanwhile, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for conscious decision-making, moral judgment, and self-awareness, remains in a deep sleep state. This lack of synchronization allows sleepwalkers to carry out complex actions like walking, climbing stairs, cooking, or even driving, without any awareness of what they are doing. This is vivid proof that many systems in the brain can operate without the need for a self. In Buddhism, the concept of the 5 aggregates, panchakanda, clearly states that human beings are not a singular entity, but a combination of processes: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. Sleepwalking demonstrates that action, sakra, and consciousness, vaya, can become completely detached from one another. 2 minds in one brain. One of the most famous experiments on the self and fragmented consciousness comes from studies on patients who underwent corpus callosotomy, the severing of the structure that connects the two hemispheres of the brain. Dr. Michael Gazzaniga, a pioneer in this field, showed that when the hemispheres are disconnected, each side of the brain seems to develop its own separate consciousness. For example, the right hemisphere sees the word Texas, but cannot speak, since language centers are in the left hemisphere. Instead, the patient uses their left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, to draw a cowboy hat, the symbol of Texas. When asked why, they say they don't know. This demonstrates that the sense of a unified self is merely an illusion constructed by the brain. In reality, within each of us exists a multitude of distinct cognitive processes, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict. In the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha taught, "The self cannot be found in the body, the mind, or any phenomenon." These discoveries in neuroscience are gradually affirming that ancient truth from a modern perspective. Part 2, Free Will, or Just an Illusion? The illusion of control. Every day, we feel like we're making decisions, from choosing a meal, speaking in a meeting, to major life choices like changing jobs or getting married. But recent discoveries in neuroscience compel us to question, is that sense of control even real? Experiments by Yuri Maus at Chapman University used transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, to test voluntary control. When he stimulated the right motor cortex, the area responsible for finger movement, participants' fingers moved involuntarily. But when asked, they were unsure whether it was they themselves or the machine that had initiated the movement. This confusion reveals something crucial: the feeling of "I did this" may be constructed after the action has already occurred. This finding is reinforced by the classic experiments of Benjamin Libet. In his research, he discovered that brain signals initiating movement occurred before the participant became consciously aware of their decision. In other words, the brain decides first, and only afterward does consciousness register and rationalize it. If you've ever felt like you're trailing behind your own actions, you probably are. The brain creates an illusion of continuity and autonomy, like a narrator stitching together disconnected events into a coherent story. But this is a product of perception, not an objective truth. From a Buddhist perspective, this aligns perfectly with the teaching of anatta, non-self. The Buddha didn't deny action, he denied the idea of a permanent agent behind the action. He called this vipallasa, the deluded perception that mistakes the temporary for the real. Improvisation and the art of letting go. Neuroscientist Charles Lim and his team conducted a fascinating study. They placed musicians inside an MRI scanner and asked them to play in two conditions, one by reading memorized sheet music, and the other by freestyle improvisation. The results showed that during improvisation, activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for self-monitoring and behavioral control, decreased significantly. Conversely, areas involved in emotional expression, motor coordination, and creativity lit up. In other words, to create, one must stop trying to control. The more one tries to consciously direct behavior, the less effective it becomes. This holds true not only for musicians, but also for athletes, public speakers, dancers, or anyone in a state of flow, a state where the mind and body operate in harmony like a seamless stream. Excellence doesn't arise from rigid willpower, but from the dissolution of the ego into the act itself. Here, Buddhist wisdom beautifully converges with modern science. In Vipassana meditation, practitioners are taught to let go of mental control, not to force the mind to be still or suppress thoughts, but simply to observe. And through deep observation, the mind becomes still on its own. When there's no one trying to control, true awareness can emerge. During deep meditation, just like in improvisational artists, the prefrontal cortex also quiets down. The mind is not being driven, but it is not unconscious either. It is clear, awake, and unattached. This is not a loss of freedom, it is true freedom. freedom from the ego, from the belief that we must control everything. If we accept that free will is relative, and interplay between conditions and awareness, then we begin to understand. The goal is not to become a perfect controller, but a truthful and compassionate observer of oneself. Part 3: Emotions, Society, and Genetics, Invisible Forces at Play. Emotions, the brain's hidden operating system. Most of the decisions we make, whether it's forgiving someone, choosing what to buy, or ending a relationship, are strongly influenced by emotions. Yet few realize that emotions are not just reactions, but a hidden operating system that links brain regions and guides behavior unconsciously. Neuroscientist Luke Chung conducted experiments involving cooperative games to examine how emotions like guilt, trust, or shame affect decision-making. In a game called the Trust Investment Game, fMRI scans showed strong activation in the insula, the brain region responsible for warning signals, intuition, and moral emotions. When participants felt guilty, they were more likely to return the money, even though they weren't required to. The insula acts like an emotional thermometer. But emotions don't stop there. For behavior to be appropriate, information from the insula needs to be passed on to the prefrontal cortex, the brain's region for regulating and integrating social values, long-term goals, and moral consequences. This is the brain's thermostat, not just sensing, but adjusting. From a Buddhist perspective, these processes clearly reflect the concepts of feeling, Vedana, and mental formations, Sakra, in the 5 aggregates, Pancakanda. Emotions arise from conditions, Vedana, and from that, behavior is generated, Sakra. Without mindfulness, emotions turn into automatic, uncontrolled reactions. But when we observe them with a calm mind, we're not swept away, we can choose to respond with wisdom. Society, the mirror of the self. Our brains are wired for community. According to Professor Rebecca Sachs, much of the brain's activity, especially in the medial temporal cortex, is devoted to understanding and interpreting other people's mental states. The brain is never isolated, it constantly sees itself through the lens of others. Research shows that when someone believes they are being watched or judged, their prefrontal cortex becomes more active. The expectations of others don't just affect behavior, they reshape the brain's own neural connections. This profoundly echoes the Buddha's teaching, all beings arise in dependence upon conditions. The self we cling to does not exist independently. It is created through relationships, through how we are seen, named, and responded to. Buddhist practice, from ethics, sila, to meditation, samadhi, to wisdom, panna, is a journey of returning to oneself in silence, peeling away the layers of mask society has imposed. But not to separate, rather, to re-enter the world with authenticity and freedom. Emotional inheritance, when the memory isn't yours. One of the most astonishing discoveries in modern neuroscience comes from the work of researcher Bianca Jones-Marlin. She demonstrated that traumatic experiences can be passed down through generations, not through stories, but through genetic expression. In one experiment, she exposed mice to the scent of almonds while delivering mild electric shocks. As a result, their olfactory neurons that respond to the almond scent increased in number. But the truly shocking part was this. The offspring of those mice, even though they had never been shocked, were born with a higher than normal number of almond-sensitive neurons. Fear had been encoded in their genes. This sheds new light on the Buddhist concept of karma. Karma is not only action, it is also the imprint left on the stream of consciousness, which may manifest as emotional tendencies, instinctive reactions, or even biological inheritance. When we understand that fear, hurt, or negative reactions may not entirely belong to us, but are part of a larger legacy of consciousness, we stop judging ourselves harshly. We begin the journey of healing with compassion and tenderness for all that has been carried through time. In a world where emotion, society, and genetics quietly steer our every move, mindfulness becomes an act of rebellion. Not to deny these influences, but to recognize and transform them. When we understand what truly drives us, we can finally place our hands on the wheel of life, not with the illusion of control, but with authentic presence and a heart full of compassion. Part 4. Consciousness, a dusted mirror. The brain, the greatest storyteller in the universe. Every day, we construct countless stories in our minds. I did that because I wanted to. I remember this clearly. I'm right, they're wrong. But are any of these truly real? Dr. Nancy Kanwisher, a neuroscientist at MIT, affirms that much of what we call consciousness is actually a narrative pieced together after the action has occurred. The brain doesn't just process signals, it's a master storyteller, constantly assigning meaning and rationalizing everything. When one hand does something unintentionally, the other finds a reason for it. As behavior unfolds, the brain quickly writes a new chapter in the novel titled Who I Am. But that also means much of the self is a fabrication, a neurological myth. And here lies the meeting point between neuroscience and Buddhism. Buddhism has long pointed out that consciousness is sana, perception, not the truth itself, but a shadow of the truth reflected through the dusted mirror of ignorance. When we think I'm right, they're wrong, I'm certain, we must remember. It may just be a recreation, not reality itself. Ego clinging, the root of suffering and delusion. We suffer not because the world isn't as we wish, but because we believe we can control everything, from emotions to circumstances. When things don't go our way, the self feels hurt, blames, regrets, and plans to tighten control. But as we've seen in previous parts, emotions, behaviors, memories, even decisions, most do not arise from any unchanging self. Dr. Anil Seth, a leading consciousness researcher at the University of Sussex, explains that personal consciousness is not an accurate reflection of reality, but a constant construction, a model created by the brain to help us survive. Consciousness is like a user interface, not a window to the truth, but a temporary veil that helps us navigate a complex world. Clinging to the self, mistaking the interface for reality itself, is what the Buddha called upadana, attachment. And from there arises dukkha, suffering. Awakening, polishing the mirror of awareness. If consciousness is a dusted mirror, then the goal of spiritual practice is not to control the mirror, but to clean it. Not to add anything. Not to force anything. Just to observe. When we sit down, close our eyes, and watch thoughts pass by, we realize thoughts are not us. Emotions are not us. And even the self is just a stream of experiences flowing through, like clouds across the sky. This is awakening. Not a better state we must achieve, but the ability to see things as they are, without being carried away. Zen masters call it returning. Neuroscientists call it meta-awareness. Whatever the name, it is the only capacity that allows us to live in wholeness, not driven by the unconscious, not deceived by the ego. Conclusion: the door to true freedom. So, who is controlling your brain? Perhaps no one, and everything. From neural impulses to childhood memories, from others' gazes to inherited genes, all intertwined to form your flow. But within that flow, there is still a vantage point, a place of stillness. That is awareness, the power to see without grasping. It does not command, it does not control, but it is also not controlled. It simply is, like light shining into a room. And maybe, that's the final answer. You don't need to control your brain. You just need to be the light that sees it. We've just walked together through a profound journey. From unconscious decisions to the dusted mirror of awareness. And perhaps, somewhere within you now, a question still echoes. If there is no true self, then who is living this life? Maybe, no one. Or maybe, it is your very awareness that is truly alive. We cannot control every function of the brain. But we can be present in each moment. like a skilled artisan listening to the breath of an instrument they've never truly touched before. And sometimes, the very moment we see through the illusion is the moment we begin to step beyond it. If this video has touched you, like a whisper at the right time, a small light in the fog, please share it with someone you love. And subscribe to the channel, so that whenever you need to return, this place will still be here, like a clear mirror, waiting to be polished. Thank you for being fully present with us today. Buddha Balance, a place where we return to ourselves, together.